There is a man sleeping outside tonight in your city. Not metaphorically, literally, right now, someone nearby is trying not to freeze to death. And the thing keeping him alive isn't a government program, isn't a shelter bed, isn't a donated sleeping bag from a charity drive. It's yesterday's newspapers. You've walked past a bundle of them 100 times without a second thought. Discarded, worthless, the thing you toss in the recycling bin without reading past the headlines. But here is what nobody told you, what the heating industry has quietly known for decades and never had any reason to advertise. That crumpled newspaper, layered correctly, traps heat with an efficiency that rivals materials costing thousands of dollars per installation. A man named Marcus discovered this not in a laboratory, but beneath a Chicago highway overpass in January, when the temperature hit 11 degrees and he had absolutely nothing else. Picture that night, the kind of cold that does not just touch your skin, it finds the gaps in everything. It slips through zippers and seams and the spaces between your fingers. The overpass above Marcus provided a ceiling but no walls, and the wind came sideways off Lake Michigan, like it had somewhere urgent to be. He had a sleeping bag, old and compressed, the kind where the synthetic fill had long since clumped and matted so that what you had was not really insulation anymore, just a thin fabric shell that remembered being warm. He had a coat. He had a wool hat pulled down over his ears, and he had, by sheer accident of where he had chosen to sleep that night, a discarded bundle of Chicago Tribunes, 3 days worth, maybe 40 pages each, held together with a rubber band someone had left behind. He was not thinking about physics. He was not thinking about R values or thermal conductivity or air permeability coefficients. He was thinking about not dying. So he started crumpling. Sheet by sheet, he crushed the pages into loose balls and stuffed them between his sleeping bag and the concrete wall behind him. He lined the floor beneath him. He crumpled pages inside his coat, against his chest, against his thighs. And then he waited. And the cold, for the first time in weeks, stopped winning. So here is the question this moment raises, and it is a question that should bother you a lot more than it probably does. How does a stack of free newspapers do what a modern heated apartment building sometimes cannot? How does a material that millions of people discard every single morning outperform products that cost tens of thousands of dollars to manufacture and install? What exactly did Marcus understand, crouched in the dark under that overpass, that the heating industry has been quietly glossing over for 50 years? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Have you ever used something unconventional, something the experts would have called primitive, and found that it actually worked better than the modern version? Because what you are about to discover will permanently change how you see warmth, insulation, and the so-called progress of modern comfort. Here is where the modern story starts going wrong. Walk into any apartment building constructed in the last 30 years and look at what is keeping you warm. Somewhere behind those drywall panels, tucked into the wall cavities, is a product the industry calls fiberglass batt insulation. Pink fluffy, held in place with a vapor barrier, stamped with an R value rating and a certification number and a manufacturer's warranty. It looks like science. It looks like progress. It looks like something developed in a laboratory by people who spent entire careers understanding heat transfer. And some of that is true. But here is what the brochure does not mention. Fiberglass insulation works by trapping air, the same fundamental mechanism that Marcus discovered with his crumpled newspapers, except that fiberglass loses effectiveness the moment cold air infiltrates the wall cavity. Studies on building thermal performance have found consistently that fiberglass batts allow significantly more air movement through the insulation layer compared to denser materials, and in cold climates, that air movement is precisely where your warmth goes to die. You're paying rent that covers the cost of a heating system, a thermostat, a boiler or furnace, and a utility bill that climbs every single winter. A substantial portion of what that system produces is leaking straight out through an insulation material that was designed not for maximum thermal performance, but for maximum ease of installation at minimum manufacturing cost. This is not a conspiracy. It's simpler and more frustrating than that. It's money, it's speed, it's the fact that fiberglass is cheap to produce, light to ship, fast to install, and good enough for building codes that have not been fundamentally revised to prioritize actual human warmth over construction industry convenience. Nobody sat in a boardroom and decided to make you cold. They just decided to make something profitable. And then they let you believe that your freezing apartment in February was a consequence of the weather, or your old radiator, or the gap under your front door, not the material sitting in your walls that was chosen because it costs less per square foot to manufacture than the alternatives. Here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. The material that outperforms fiberglass in peer-reviewed building science research, in cold climate military studies, and in documented historical use, going back over 200 years, is made almost entirely from recycled newspaper. The industry calls it cellulose insulation. Strip away the branding, and what you have is shredded, treated newspaper blown into wall cavities, doing exactly what Marcus did under that overpass, trapping air, blocking convection, and sealing the spaces where warmth escapes. And it works better. The University of Colorado conducted building performance research comparing identical test structures insulated with cellulose versus fiberglass, and the cellulose buildings used measurably less heating energy and maintained higher interior temperatures during cold overnight hours. The buildings were the same. The heating systems were the same. The only variable was what was packed inside the walls. Newspaper 1, you are not broken. Your cold apartment is not your fault. You were handed a product designed around what was cheapest to build, given a utility bill, and told the problem was yours to solve. So let's go layer by layer into why newspaper actually works. Marcus did not discover something primitive. He rediscovered something elegant. The elegance is worth understanding precisely because once you see it clearly, you will never look at a discarded stack of newspapers the same way again. The first principle is air. That's it. That's the entire secret. Warmth is not created by insulation. This is the foundational misunderstanding that the heating industry has never had any financial interest in correcting. Insulation does not make heat. It traps it. Your body generates heat constantly, roughly 80 to 100 watts at rest, and more when you are moving. The question is never how to create warmth. It is how to stop it from escaping. And the best substance on Earth for resisting heat transfer is still air, specifically still, trapped, completely motionless air. AOR conducts heat so poorly that its thermal conductivity registers at just 0.025 watts per meter per Kelvin. To translate that into something you can feel, still air is roughly 25 times more resistant to heat flow than solid wood. The problem is that air in motion, convecting, circulating, exchanging with the cold outside, loses that insulating quality entirely. It becomes the enemy instead of the ally. Insulation works only when air is held perfectly still. The genius of cellulose fiber and of crumpled newspaper is that it creates thousands of tiny, isolated air chambers distributed throughout its entire structure. Think of it like a building full of sealed rooms, where every door and every window has been permanently shut. No air travels from room to room, no cold front pushes through. Each pocket stays perfectly still, and still air holds heat with a stubbornness that no synthetic fiber has managed to beat at the same cost per square foot. Cellulose does this by design. Here's where it gets even more remarkable. When Marcus crumpled those newspapers, he was doing something that professional cellulose insulation installers describe as achieving optimal loft, the technical term for the precise ratio of airspace to fiber mass. Too compressed and you destroy the air pockets and lose everything. Too loose and air circulates freely inside the gaps, convecting the heat away just as fast as it builds. The crumpled ball structure of hand-prepared newspaper creates a loft ratio remarkably close to what blown-in cellulose achieves mechanically with an industrial pressurized blower. He arrived at it through instinct and desperation, not training. Loft is the balance between trapped air and supporting fiber. The R value of crumpled newspaper, the standardized measurement of thermal resistance per inch, sits at approximately 3.5. Commercial cellulose insulation, which is 80 to 85% recycled shredded newspaper treated with borate-based fire retardants, achieves between 3.1 and 4.0 per inch. Standard fiberglass bats rate between 2.9 and 3.8 per inch. In other words, the material Marcus found in a discarded bundle on a concrete floor matches or outperforms the product installed in buildings by licensed contractors charging $30 to $50 per square foot of coverage. The numbers are not dramatically different. They are essentially identical. The price difference is enormous. The performance difference does not justify it. Our value is about trapped air more than brand or price. The second principle is our ceiling, and this is where newspaper and its industrial descendant, cellulose, pulls definitively ahead of fiberglass in real cold weather conditions. Fiberglass is a loose, permeable matrix. It insulates adequately when conditions are still, but it allows air to migrate through it under pressure, and exterior walls are under constant wind pressure every time a cold front moves through. Studies on building envelope performance have documented that dense, packed cellulose reduces air infiltration through insulated wall cavities by roughly 36 to 38% compared to fiberglass bats installed in the same cavities. What this means plainly is that when wind is driving cold air against your building, cellulose holds the line. Fiberglass yields. It lets the cold find its way through. Marcus, by lining the wall behind him and the floor beneath him with crumpled pages, was accomplishing both goals simultaneously, building thermal resistance and sealing the conductive pathway between his body C and the raw concrete. That concrete slab was functioning as a heat sink, drawing thermal energy away from him continuously. The newspaper layer interrupted that transfer completely. The crumpled pages against the wall broke the convective loop before it could establish itself. He wasn't just insulating, he was constructing a complete thermal envelope around himself out of material that cost nothing, weighed almost nothing, and had been sitting 3 feet away being ignored by everyone who walked past. If this is shifting how you understand the world you thought you already knew, and it should be, hit like and subscribe, because what comes next is the piece of this story that the building industry has the strongest financial incentive to make sure you never encounter. The third principle is history, and history is where the story stops being just interesting and starts being genuinely infuriating. During the Great Depression, millions of Americans sleeping without shelter covered themselves with newspapers they bitterly named Hoover blankets, a piece of dark political humor directed at the president, assuring them that prosperity was just around the corner. The name lasted because the blankets worked. They were not adequate. They were not comfortable, but they worked well enough that people reached for them instinctively in city after city across the country before a single modern synthetic insulation material existed. During the Winter War of 1939 and 1940, Finnish soldiers facing catastrophic cold weather equipment shortages used folded and layered newspaper tucked inside their clothing as emergency insulation. Military observers documented the approach as effective enough to sustain men through conditions that available wool substitutes could not consistently handle. The U.S. Army, running its own independent evaluation of improvised insulation during the same period, tested paper-based undergarments and recorded them as windproof and warm, with thermal properties the evaluators described as surprising. The U.S. Army's written assessment noted that people surviving on the margins of society had independently arrived at sound thermal engineering through sheer necessity alone. And then, the most precise scientific evidence of all. In 2017, researchers published a study in the peer-reviewed journal Acta Pediatrica examining newspaper as emergency thermal insulation for newborn infants requiring hospital transfer in India. Newborns represent one of the most thermally vulnerable populations in all of medicine. They cannot regulate body temperature independently and lose core heat with terrifying speed when exposed to cold air. The researchers wrapped neonates in newspaper, sandwiched between cotton cloth layers, and measured their temperatures on arrival at the neonatal intensive care unit. The infants wrapped with the newspaper layer arrived measurably and statistically significantly warmer than the control group. No specialized equipment, no electricity, no supply chain required. Doctors documented this. Militaries documented this. Building scientists documented this. The knowledge was never lost. It was simply inconvenient for the industries that built their entire profit structure on replacing it with something more expensive to manufacture and easier to charge for. So why did we abandon what worked? The answer moves through three overlapping causes, and the sequence should feel familiar because it follows the same logic that hollowed out dozens of other industries. First, speed. Fiberglass bats can be cut and friction fitted into wall cavities by a single unskilled worker in minutes per section. Cellulose installation requires a blower machine, a trained operator, and more deliberate application time. In the post-World War II American housing boom, with millions of homes being built as rapidly as possible for returning veterans, fiberglass was simply faster to put inside a wall. Speed won. Second, cost. At an industrial scale, through the 1950s and 1960s, fiberglass manufacturing costs dropped sharply as the technology matured, making it cheaper per unit of coverage than processed cellulose at that particular moment in economic history. Cheaper won. Third, culture. The post-war petrochemical boom made synthetic materials feel like the future in a way that recycled newspaper simply could not. Glass fibers and synthetic polymers carried the cultural weight of scientific modernity. Newspaper carried the weight of Hoover blankets, bread lines, and men sleeping in city parks. Nobody finishing a new suburban home in 1957 wanted Depression-era materials packed into their walls, so the industry obliged. It built 50 years of building codes around what it was already producing at scale. The hidden cost, the air infiltration gap, and the cold climate performance difference was never adequately measured or disclosed at the point of product selection. By the time building science researchers documented the performance shortfall clearly, the fiberglass industry was too large, too entrenched, and too deeply embedded in regulatory codes to be displaced, so you kept getting the inferior product. And you kept paying the heating bills that came with it every single winter without ever being told why. Here's what you can actually do with this knowledge, starting today. The first option, if you live in a cold climate and your heating costs climb every winter without a satisfying explanation, is to contact a cellulose insulation contractor in your area and ask specifically about dense packed cellulose installation in your wall cavities and attic. This is not experimental or exotic. Cellulose insulation is a $2 billion global industry with mature installation processes available in virtually every major American city. When you speak to a contractor, ask explicitly for AIR ceiling performance data alongside the R-value figure. The R-value comparison to fiberglass is nearly identical. The meaningful gap is in infiltration reduction, and infiltration is precisely where your heating dollars are currently escaping unnoticed every month. The second option, if you want to test the underlying principle before spending a single dollar, is a DIY experiment. Take a cardboard box of any size, crumple newspaper into loose balls, and pack every interior surface, including all four walls, the floor, and the lid, with at least 3 solid inches of crumpled pages. Place a thermometer inside and set the box somewhere cold. After 30 minutes, measure the interior temperature against the exterior ambient temperature. You will watch the physics operate in real time using your own equipment at zero cost. This is not a folk remedy. This is thermal resistance making itself visible for free in your own home. The third option, the absolute baseline. The next time you are caught cold without adequate gear, camping, stranded, or caught anywhere, warmth is unavailable and newspaper is accessible. Use it. Stuff crumpled pages inside your jacket against your torso and thighs. Line the ground beneath you before sleeping. Pack pages tightly against the walls of the smallest enclosed space you can create around your body. 3 inches of crumpled newspaper delivers thermal resistance comparable to a wall, insulated to residential building code in moderate American climates. You carry this knowledge now. Most people walking past that recycling bin every morning still do not. Marcus, crouched under that 11-degree Chicago wind, was not improvising blindly in the dark. He was applying, without knowing a single piece of the technical vocabulary, the same thermal engineering principles that Finnish military officers recorded in wartime field reports, that building science laboratories confirmed in controlled university research, that neonatal physicians published in peer-reviewed medical journals. He was a thermal engineer who happened to be sleeping on concrete. He just did not have an institution willing to hand him a certificate for what he already understood. The knowledge wasn't lost. It was traded away, exchanged for manufacturing speed and quarterly profit, and the cultural desire to leave the depression behind and never look back. And then the people who made that trade handed you the heating bill and called the whole arrangement progress. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling on this thread. We are digging up the thermal engineering, the survival science, and the building knowledge that the modern comfort industry quietly left behind. And there is far more where this came from. Tell us in the comments what topic you want us to investigate next. What did someone you know survive using something the experts would have dismissed as primitive? We want to know.